My name is Maria Briviesco. I'm the Deputy State Director for LULAC, Iowa. That is the United Latin American Citizens, the League of United Latin American Citizens of Iowa. LULAC, Iowa, and the Rotary of West Liberty, we're proud to host this gubernatorial forum for the candidates running for the nomination of the Democratic Party. We organized this event as a public service to the community. We believe that an informed citizenry leads to better government. More information leads to better decisions. Both organizations, LULAC and the Rotary of West Liberty, we are nonpartisan, we're not for profit, we're not advocates for any political party. We had planned a similar forum for the Republican candidates, which is the other major political party in the state. However, both Republican candidates for governor of the Republican Party stated that they were not available. There was some sort of schedule conflict. Our forum today is very ambitious. We're covering 4 topics, which is sort of unusual, but it's intended to give everyone a glimpse into the candidate's position. And perhaps at some other time, at another forum, we can get more in-depth and get a little bit more substance. But I think this is a way for us to have you meet the candidates and get to hear their positions on the 4 topics for discussion here tonight. The MC or the moderator for this evening is Gabriela Vidal. Ms. Vidal is a journalist and reporter with CBS 2 and Fox 28 in Cedar Rapids. Please help me welcome Ms. Vidal with a round of applause.
Introduction. Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Gabriela Vidal and I will be your MC and moderator for this event. First I want to thank LULAC Iowa and the Rotary for organizing and hosting this timely and important event, and also for letting me be a part of this event with all of you all tonight. Thank you candidates for running for public office and being here tonight, and thank you to the audience for showing your support for government and being involved in your community as well. We have a tight schedule due to the number of candidates presenting tonight, and that's a good thing. We have a lot of opportunity to hear from a number of people tonight, and also limits the time to answer all these questions that we'd like the candidates to have an opportunity to answer. My job tonight will be to explain the process or rules, if you will, and mainly to see that things run smoothly and we don't go over time, give everyone a chance to answer their questions as best as they can. We have 4 panelists that have been assigned a specific topic. There's a brief bio and photo of the panelists on the back of your pamphlets that are on your seats. And for civil rights, asking some of the civil rights questions, we have Jason Daniel Ulola. Sorry if I butchered that. I should have asked you beforehand. He is a PhD and works at the University of Iowa College of Public Health. And then for environment, we have Daniel Osterberg. Actually, you can raise your hand when I introduce you. There you go. That way everyone knows who you are. Who's the clinical professor in the University of Iowa Department of Occupational Environment and Health. For education, we have Dan Stevenson, teacher and president of the West Liberty Education Association. And for fiscal responsibility, we have Jasmine Newton-Butt, the attorney and president of Davenport LULAC Council. Now there are strict time limits on asking the questions as well as on the answers that our candidates will give. Each candidate will be asked a question on each of the 4 topics and will have about 2 minutes to answer. Then the timekeeper, who is right in the middle, will be raising up cards every time we're down to less time. She'll raise the number 30 when there's about 30 seconds left. When there's 15 seconds left, a yellow card will be raised. And then when time's up, there will be a red card that will be raised. Now each card will be lifted by our volunteer, and the candidates will be able to see the signs. I'll also be able to see the signs to help them mitigate some of the time. And we would appreciate if the candidates could stop at that point, but of course as a courtesy, we will let you finish a sentence that you are on. Now there are 3 questions on each topic. The organizers of tonight's event already determined by random selection which questions to ask each candidate by roll of a die. And we've explained this to the candidates and panelists as well. And to facilitate the questions being asked will be projected on the large screen you'll see overhead, and so the audience, you guys can see it as well. Now we're going to start the program with candidates introducing themselves. The order of speaking is alphabetical. Each candidate will have 2 minutes, and we'll start with candidate Bolton, who actually sent a surrogate here today to speak on his behalf.
Hi everyone, my name is Emiliano Martinez. I'm the surrogate for the Nate Bolton for Iowa campaign. I'm a senior at the University of Iowa. I'm the president of a group known as Hawkeyes for Dream Iowa. And today I'm here because I attended the first Latino Day on the Hill last Thursday. And with that, I saw the Republican Governor, Kim Reynolds, in front of our community, the Latinx community, say that when she was a young girl, she could never imagine herself becoming governor of a state that has a rich tradition such as Iowa does. And as she was saying that, I looked at the faces of the children that stood next to her, and I looked at the faces of all those people around me. And what I thought of was the 800,000 children enrolled in DACA who don't wish that they could be governor of a state of Iowa, but wish that they could even have an opportunity to believe such a thing was possible. And with that, I'm here today as a DACA activist. I'm here today as a student of the University of Iowa. I'm here today as a lifelong Iowan. As I'm the son of 2 parents who are first-generation college graduates who decided that Iowa was a state that had the opportunities that would give their children the greatest outcome in life. And I'm here before you today to tell you that I believe that Nate Bolton is the candidate that represents all the intrinsic values that we hold so dearly as Iowans, as Americans, and as people who care about their community and are dedicated to others and service to others. Thank you.
Good evening. You have to excuse me, I have a little laryngitis. My name is Kathy Glosson, and I'm an intensive care nurse, a union leader, and Democratic candidate for governor. And I believe the #1 job of a governor is to improve the standard of living for every single Iowan. And that job starts by raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, making it easier for workers to join in a union, and ensuring that all Iowans get the health care they need by investing in universal single-payer health care. If we invest in these bold progressive ideas, we have the opportunity to improve the lives of over 1 million Iowans in our state who are confronted every day with enormous inequities and struggles. And I believe investing in these bold ideas is especially important for our Latino communities who are confronted every day with enormous wage inequalities. In fact, Latino families in Iowa earn almost $12,000 less than the average family in Iowa. And they face discrimination and harassment in the workplace at levels far beyond those of non-Hispanic communities. And while the state average for Iowans without health care is at 4.3%, the Latino community in Iowa has an uninsured rate of 15.1%. We can and must do better to raise the standard of living for our Latino communities. Part of raising the standard of living for Iowans means ensuring that Iowans feel safe and accepted no matter where they come from. We must work together to establish every town and city in the state of Iowa as a welcoming community, communities that will stand together against racism, against discrimination, and ensure that the bigoted and reckless immigration policies of this presidential administration will never be tolerated in Iowa. We need a voice in the governor's office who will fight. We need a voice in the governor's office who will fight alongside our Latino communities. No more lip service. My name is Kathy Glosson. I would like to be that voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Andy McGuire, and I'm running for governor, and I see a lot of old friends and new friends out there in the audience. And I also want to thank LULAC and Rotary for putting this on. This is exactly what we should be doing as governor candidates, is coming out and meeting people. If you think, as candidates, if we're here, we've got a chance of being here as governor. Think about that. So I'm from Waterloo originally. Grew up in a family of 8. When my dad was a World War II veteran, came home and started a construction machinery business. My mom stayed home with us. And like a lot of us were talking about in our communities, I learned about caring about other people. And that's in every community, where we care that someone's hurt and we help them. Somebody's down and we get them back up. But right now, I hear a lot about other things. The reason I became a doctor was because I saw the power of caring about someone else, especially when they were sick or injured. But right now, I hear people talking about not getting a fair shake and not getting ahead for their families and not being able to really feel like they have that caring spirit anymore in Iowa, especially from their government. Honestly, feeling like the government's putting profits ahead of people. Well, as a doctor, I will never do that. So that's why I'm running for governor, because I want to put people first. That's what doctors do. I want to talk a little bit about healthcare. We've got a Medicaid mess. It involves 600,000 of our fellow Iowans. It's something that needs to be fixed as quickly as possible, and I have the expertise to do that. We should not be having the mother of disabled children worrying about where they're going to get access to health care. We've got to talk about mental health and how we're going to take care of people who are struggling with mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. And we've got to talk about public education and how important it is that we back our teachers up and give them the resources they need. I'm running for governor because I've had a lot of opportunities, and I want to make sure that every Iowan in every community has the same opportunities I've had, and their children have them, and their grandchildren have them. Thank you.
Good evening. John Niederbach running for governor. What an amazing crowd. And someone asked me before we started to make sure at every opportunity to remind people to caucus next week. Now, I don't think there's a lot of chance that anybody who comes to this event isn't planning to go to the caucus, but make sure you do. People ask me all the time how I think Iowa is doing. And frankly, I would say we are knee-deep in quicksand. I think we have lost sight of what's important, and we aren't taking care of business. Our environment is deteriorating terribly. Our education system is not what it was and what it needs to be. Our political system has become dominated by big money and special interests. Our economic development is misdirected. We need a wholesale change in our policies. But probably most important, what really distresses me most as I travel around the state, is that people don't feel they can change things. People feel that the political and economic and legal systems, the healthcare system and the education system have gone away from them, have gone past them, that they aren't working for them anymore. I'm someone who believes we need wholesale, radical change. We'll talk about lots of policies in the next hour and a half, and I'm sure as we get into them, you'll see what I'm talking about. But I don't think the time for incremental change is upon us. We need strong, powerful change that doesn't postpone things, that says, let's put Iowans first. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Norris, candidate for governor. I'm here tonight to ask for your support. I'm also here tonight because Latino population is the fastest growing percentage of population in Iowa. And nowhere do I recall in my lifetime do Iowa Latinos or Latinos across this country feel the stress that they have from their government and our society than today. With DACA, with the racist comments of people like our own Congressman Steve King, it's time for us to stand up and say we treat all people fairly and equally in our state. I could have been somewhere else tonight. I was lobbied hard to go to the Renewable Fuels Association forum tonight for gubernatorial candidates, just a few weeks ago. I've been the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I've been the head of the State Farm Unity Coalition. And I've been the U.S. Representative to the United Nations for Agricultural Policy. That was tempting, to go talk about renewable fuels for Iowa tonight. But we knew about this forum a long time ago, and I gave my word. And giving your word means something to me, and that's why I'm here tonight. Because it's important we talk about the issues that affect the Latino community and talk about the issues that affect rural Iowa. The candidates who are not here made a mistake by breaking their word and not recognizing the importance of this issue. I fought my life fighting for economic and social justice. When I helped Jesse Jackson organize the Rainbow Coalition in Iowa in the 1980s. When I marched with Cesar Chavez in California for environmental justice for migrant workers. I didn't do that because I was going to run for governor 30 years later. I did it because it's core of who I am and what I fight for. I've been fighting for economic and social justice all my life, and as your governor, you're going to have someone who's going to stick up for folks in this state, who needs someone to stick up for them and fight for the rights of everyone in Iowa. That's what my governorship will be about, and that's why I'm here tonight to ask for your support. Thanks.
Good evening, and thank you to LULAC and the Rotary Club for sponsoring this gubernatorial forum. And thank all of you for being here on a Tuesday night in January. It shows your commitment and your passion to the future of our state. I want to encourage involvement in the Democratic Party, its grassroots and volunteer work, and that's what democracy and improving our community is all about. Let me tell you a little about myself and why I'm running for governor. Among all the candidates, I'm a little different, and let me tell you why. I've got 12 years experience as elected official at the local level and served in executive leadership. I was mayor of Iowa City. I also worked for Iowa State University Extension and Outreach in all 99 counties. I'm reaching out to Iowans with a simple, clear message. Let's be Iowa. And so let's be Iowa. Let's commit ourselves to building a healthy Iowa, an Iowa where you can make a living, where we believe in our civil rights, a strong educational system, and a welcoming, inclusive Iowa where we are not threatened by dual language programs and have opportunities for all, especially our young people. I remember in the early 1990s when I was a youth worker traveling to West Liberty, working with young Latino and Latinas, providing counseling, but also just having a positive connection with an adult. I also enjoyed coming here for girls' softball tournaments and just the intercultural experience that our young girls got to know working with and playing here. And that's part of the diversity and welcoming state that Iowa needs to be. We need effective community-based services, policies, and processes for children, youth from birth to adulthood. We need to stop human trafficking, sexual abuse, improve anti-human trafficking laws, make sure all our young people can experience positive community here in the state. So let's grow urban and rural economies, let's extend broadband, let's make generational decisions to have a positive impact for all Iowans. I look forward to the questions tonight, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you all for your introduction and for saying a little bit more about yourself and what you stand for. So now we're going to begin. I'll make a reminder. You have 2 minutes to answer the questions. You all did pretty well with the introductions at keeping with the timekeeper. So we will begin. We're going to start with candidate McGuire, and your question is going to be question B, and Mr. Stevenson will be reading that question.
Thank you. Recent changes to public union bargaining laws, Chapter 20, quote, reform, unquote, have caused uncertainty for educators. Teachers are an important component to the academic success of students. I'm president of the local teachers union, and we are discouraged with the changes in Chapter 20. As governor, what would you do to protect and promote public education and educators?
Well, great question. And teachers and schools are the hearts of our community, and I honor every teacher in the audience because that's how we all become successful, I believe, and that's the great equalizer. Chapter 20 reform, and you kind of laughed. That's exactly what you should do, is laugh. There was not a problem with Chapter 20. It had worked since 1973 on a bipartisan basis. It was a great framework for everyone to be able to do what they needed. There was very few really wrinkles in it, and yet we didn't take a little piece of it and amend it. We blew it up, and we didn't. The Republicans did. And that was just mean-spirited. I can't think of any other reason why they did it. We need to honor our teachers, respect our teachers, and make sure they have the bargaining rights they need to be able to have fair incomes coming in, fair resources, and fair working conditions. They can't even bargain for that. That's just terrible. But also what we have to do is give them the funds they need so they can do the job we ask them to do. You know, I want to make sure every child in every zip code has quality public education, and there's only one way that happens, and that's to give our teachers the resources they need to teach our kids. And you've noticed our budget, which is a mess, but our budget is going to be balanced on the back of education again. This is another cut to education. Now, right now, they're talking about higher education, but I think of education and teachers. I think of teachers in pre-K. I think of teachers in K through 12. I think of teachers at our Regents universities, our community college, our apprenticeships. I think of all the way along that spectrum. And that's what we ought to be doing. And we ought to know that this is how every child can be the success they need to be in Iowa. Every child. Isn't that what we want? And yet we're going to cut teachers and make their work less important. I won't do that as governor. I will replace Chapter 20, and I will always respect and fund our teachers. Thank you.
So candidate Niederbach, you're up next, and your question is going to be question C. Stanley, please read the question.
Thank you. From its founding in 1838 to today, West Liberty is a place that's welcomed newcomers and provided the tools for them to succeed. There have been instances of bullying with racist overtones in Iowa schools. Just last week, there was a disturbing incident at a basketball game involving students from Spencer. As governor, what would you do to ensure that all students feel safe and have a real opportunity to succeed?
As a former school board member, I was heartbroken by the events in Spencer. And it wasn't the first time that's happened either. Clearly, we have a major problem with folks whipping up xenophobic, racist, bigoted sentiment in Iowa. And I think we all know some of the folks who are doing that, some of our elected officials. We need to directly confront it. We need to make sure that the curriculum in every Iowa school directly addresses the long history of immigrants to Iowa and to America, and their tremendous contribution they have played. We need to not be afraid to talk about very sensitive subjects. Frankly, I think that's the biggest single impediment to fighting racism, bigotry, xenophobia, is we're all too Iowa nice. Maybe because I was born in New York, many of 43 years, maybe because I was born in New York, I'm willing to say we can't be Iowa nice on this anymore. It is intolerable in 2018 to have what happened in Spencer happen. I've said that I will have an annual conference addressing pluralism, because really what happened in Spencer is just another manifestation of the same bigotry against various religions, and the same sort of bigotry against folks with different sexual orientation and trans folks. It's all the same, different facets of the same sort of thing, and we need to directly confront it and make it very clear about as elected officials and as a government, we will not tolerate it.
Now, next is Mr. Norris, and your question is going to be B.
Again, recent changes to public union bargaining laws, Chapter 20 reform, have caused uncertainty for educators. Teachers are an important component to the academic success of students. As president of the local teachers union, we are discouraged with Chapter 20 changes. As governor, what would you do to protect and promote public education and educators?
Thank you. I Gotta say, would like to repeat everything Andy said, so I'll just say, I'm gonna add on to what Andy said.
Thank you, John.
Yes, Chapter 20 was working fine, it was outrageous. They did it, there was no public outcry for it, and they're driving a right-wing Koch brother agenda down the middle of Iowa, and this is one of the products of that. The reality is, we need both the governorship and the change in legislature to reverse the damage that was done on this and many other items that the legislature did last year under Republican control. So realistically, we're not going to be able to reinstate Chapter 20 until we win both the governor's race and elect Democrats and fair-minded Republicans to reverse this damage. It will be a key agenda of mine, but that's how you use that governor's office. To change a mindset and set a different direction for this state so we can empower more progressive legislators to be elected. And that's a critical role of the governor as leader of our party in addition to our state. Public education in Iowa is as fundamental a value, I believe, as our love for the land and our sense of community. It's what we built this state upon. It's what our communities revolve around. It's the window of opportunity and the opportunity for everyone to have a chance to succeed. When I grew up, we expected Iowa to be the best in the country in education. Sometimes Minnesota would slip in there and beat us once in a while. And we'd get upset about that because we wouldn't allow it. This governor doesn't even aspire to be the top half in the country. The funding for education levels are woefully inadequate to address the issues we face in our schools today. With no children's mental health services, with half of our children eligible for Medicaid in this state, free and reduced lunch has doubled in the last 15 years. Our schools face much more difficult challenges for that classroom teacher who's the bedrock of our public education system. We have to turn this around for the future of this state.
Thank you. Mr. Wilburn, sorry, I'm losing my voice here and there, so hopefully I make it through. Mr. Wilburn, your question is going to be C. Dan, can you please read the question?
From its founding in 1838 to today, West Liberty is a place that's welcomed newcomers and provided tools for them to succeed. There have been instances of bullying with racist overtones in Iowa schools. Just last week, there was a disturbing incident at a basketball game involving students from Spencer. As governor, what will you do to ensure that all Iowa students feel safe and have a real opportunity to succeed?
And thank you for the question. And first,
Now that I have your attention.
clock reset. Or maybe you should deduct if it was me. Okay, let's try that again. So first, we need to make a commitment and rededicate ourselves to the civil rights that we have, which includes some of the bullying legislation. And it's not just a matter of putting that legislation out, there has to be understanding about what's being enforced, and we need to emphasize that it's not just about punishment. There's an education component when we're looking at the school level. There's an education in the curriculum. There's many curriculum that can be out there in terms of not just citizenship, but understanding, getting along with each other. We need to take a step back to as adults, just to realize that, you know, if adults are bullying each other, if our president is using language that is bullying towards others, then what do we expect from our young people? So it is a matter of expectations with this as well. But, you know, there's things from the bully pulpit that the governor can do. One is being a welcoming, inclusive state and welcoming those who are different, welcoming those who are new to Iowa. And those are the types of positions and statements that the leader, the governor, can make. I think another thing that we can do, it's not just a symbolic thing, but opportunities for young people who feel that they have been bullied to get together, to learn from each other, to get support. One of the things, a great thing that goes on is the LGBTQIA conference with the Safe Schools. You know, projects like that can be replicated not just for that community, but for other communities of color, rural youth. You know, there's bullying that goes on across the board. And so some of it's symbolic, some of it is recommitting ourselves to enforcing policies that are out there, and then a quality control amongst educators, parents involved in keeping safe school is a safe place to learn and to work.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, who's speaking on behalf of Nate Bolton. Your question is A. Dan, please read the question.
The West Liberty School District is strong because of its diversity and engaged community. The needs of Iowa schools, including West Liberty, have grown. However, state aid for education has decreased significantly. As governor, what would Nate Bolton do to ensure that Iowa public schools are funded at a level to meet the needs of our students?
State Senator Bolton fully supports funding for public education. He's outraged that for the past 7 years, Republicans in the legislature, led by Terry Branstad and now Governor Kim Reynolds, have slashed funding for public education. I'm a student at the University of Iowa. Over the next 5 years, tuition is about to go up 42%. That's outrageous. That's a ridiculous premise that the in-state tuition for so many Iowans who have very little option, who are competing with students that are going to be paying out-of-state tuition that's going to be even higher than that, are going to have to deal with the financial liability of that on their own, taking out loans and dealing with the different issues that stem from a state government pushing their public education funding onto students. And with that, it is against the dramatic cuts that Republicans introduced last week, almost $20 million cut from region institutions and $5.5 million from community colleges. And a quote from Senator Bolton: "Republicans cannot simply cut and underfund education to the bone and then run away calling it failing public education systems. By implementing education savings accounts, starving the system for 7 years, and then abandoning it to further encourage private homeschooling is the wrong approach." Nate has introduced legislation that expands preschool to all 5-year-olds in Iowa. Nate has supported the EO program in Iowa and has seen firsthand the importance of growing up in Columbus Junction and seeing how fellow students were able to succeed with a strong EO program that works for them.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. And now, Ms. Glasson, your question will also be A. Dan, can you please reread the question?
The West Liberty School District is strong because of its diversity and engaged community. The needs of Iowa schools, including West Liberty, have grown. However, state aid for educators and education have decreased significantly. As governor, what would you do to ensure that Iowa public schools are funded at a level to meet the needs of our students?
Well, we need to put our money where our values are, and that isn't happening in the state capitol these days. As governor, I have come out bold in saying that I will fully fund K-12 public education at 6% increase over current budget funding for K-12. I will veto anything less than 4% funding for our K-12 system. And the reason I say that is because that's what Iowa used to fund our public schools at that level. It's ridiculous that we're starving public education in our state and demonizing the teachers that provide the quality education to our students. And I'm all about affordable college for our students as well. As governor, my first month in office, we will have tuition-free community colleges. I also will immediately put a freeze on our public universities, tuition freeze, and we will work to make in-state undergraduate tuition for those students so that those students graduate debt-free from any of our public universities. And we will do that by rolling back the tax breaks that we're giving to corporations to the tune of $600 million a year. We absolutely have to put our value, this governor and the folks in Des Moines think that we should be giving corporate tax breaks instead of funding the things we value as Iowans, which one of the key elements is public education and healthcare as well.
Environment. And we're going to start with Mr. Norris. Mr. Norris, your question will be A. Mr. Osterberg, can you please read question A?
Question A says, the way we reduce water pollution in this nation overall was to require industry and ordinary citizens to pay to upgrade plants that discharge into waterways. Should we treat agriculture differently from this?
Let me say, agriculture has to be accountable for our water quality crisis in this state. But I also want to say that we have had ag policies in this country for decades that have directed, incentive, moved farmers to farm the way they farm in this state, with all the incentives being to produce more and more off 1 acre of land, and the one option to do that was to put more chemical inputs into that land to be eligible for greater crop insurance, greater subsidies. We've also benefited from that in this state from the increased tax revenues that the ag industry has provided in this state. So I'm not going to stand here today and point the finger at Iowa farmers and say this is all your fault, because we've driven this system of industrial scale agriculture in this state, and I think we all have to be a part of cleaning it up. That's why I've called for more public research. We should be doubling funding for the Leopold Center, not eliminating it. And utilize that public research and extension to help farmers understand that you can plant cover crops and increase soil health and at the same time reduce nutrients, and they can be more profitable and clean up our water supply at the same time. So we've got to look for a way to move this state forward to address our water crisis, including changing the culture and practice of farming in this state so it's farmed sustainably. And also we have to diversify. One of the most exciting days of my campaign so far was about a week and a half ago at the Practical Farmers of Iowa in Ames, when I saw 1,000 people practically, more than half were under the age of 40, maybe most of those half under the age of 30, looking to make a living off our incredible land sustainably and in balance with ecology, through raising livestock that wasn't pumped full of antibiotics, through orchards, through vineyards. And that was the most encouraging thing I saw about beginning to diversify agriculture, because our future is not in mass-produced #2 yellow corn at a loss, at the same time degrading our environment. And we've got to look at where agriculture can go in this state and lead and get it there.
Thank you, Mr. Norris. And now we're going to have Mr. Osterberg read question. Oh, sorry. Wow, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Mr. Wilburn, your question will be C. David, will you please write question C?
If Dave wants to answer it for me too, that'd be
I
okay.
mean,
It's up behind you. As a means of to improve the quality of life in rural Iowa and the quality of water, would you consider limits to be placed on either the state or local government, limits on the number of new confined animal feeding operations in the state?
The answer is yes to both. There's a way it can be done in two ways. One, I think that as a former mayor, I certainly have respect and appreciation for local control within certain guidelines. That guideline is when there is a minimum threshold that we want to have. So I think that you know, there should be local control. Return it to counties to place some constraints on that. But what they do should be no lower than the state. So the state level should be a floor. And I think there are some other aspects to that. Part of that, with that local controls, including some reconfiguration of the master matrix, looking at manure plans, but even stepping back further, you know, fully staffing the Department of Natural Resources in order to enforce the revised law, and give the directive to the director of DNR to enforce it. You will enforce that. All of this is part of a strategy of climate change resiliency. We need to be looking at that. Climate change is here, it's happening, it's going to continue to happen, especially if we don't have leadership in Washington, D.C. from the national level for observing things like the Paris Agreement, which is something that as governor, I would say as a state, we should try and follow. But we need to kind of pivot to do things, not only that monitoring, but preparing our state for diversifying crops, for preparing ourselves as the climate change and others from coastal areas relocate to the Midwest to be able to absorb folks coming here, and so that we can actually you know, feed ourselves and not just the world, which is kind of a slight fallacy, since, what is it, 1% of the corn is actually sweet corn that we can eat, and the other is for ag. But that's the type of pivot that we need to make is climate change resiliency.
Mr. Waldron. And now, Mr. Martinez, your question will also be C. David, could you please reread the question?
I can. As a means of improving, I look at it and it's not right. As a means of improving the quality of life in rural Iowa and the quality of water, would you consider limits be placed either by state or local governments on the number of new confined animal feeding operations? And please elaborate on yes or no.
On behalf of Senator Bolton, he introduced a bill last year to fund Iowa Water and Land Legacy Trust, which Iowans supported by over 70%. Senator Bolton was disappointed the water quality bill passed in the House last week. HF 512 had no accountability or watershed approach, did not create new funding source for the long-term water quality strategy. One of the few tax credits that Nate Bolton supports, the solar and wind tax credits. Nate fully supports the renewable energy industry, especially here in Iowa, where as it combats climate change and creates jobs in this state. Nate is dedicated to ensuring 50% of Iowa's energy is created by renewable resources by 2025. And Nate's wife is the trail director for the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, and they're avid outdoor recreationalists and understand the importance of recreational tourism, which Iowa cannot achieve when our waterways are full of algae and the beaches are closed. And as a 23-year-old, I would say that environmental issues in this state, urban and rural, are some of the most important issues that my generation sees coming on the horizon. We need to address these issues as a whole, and we need to address these issues in any way that ensures that Iowans, Americans, everybody has access to clean water, access to the things that prevent illness, and access to our public lands, and access to so many of the things that we hold dear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. And now, Ms. Klassen, your question will be B. David, please read question B.
In 2013, Iowa introduced what was called the nutrient reduction strategy. And among the things that it did was to really push hard on cover crops. Now, since 2013, we've had a few years, and in none of those have they had more than 100,000 acres of new cover crops. But the goal is 13 million. And so the end of the question is, Governor, what will you do to further encourage the planting of those cover crops?
Well, we know that we need to assist farmers in making sure that they use sustainable and regenerative farming practices. And one of those is, and this all helps our environment by reducing carbon emissions. So when farmers till their crops, what they do every time they do that is release carbon into the air. We need to encourage farmers to use cover crops because it does two important things, or three important things actually. It actually keeps the carbon from being released when they don't till and put cover crops in, and it adds nutrients to the soil so that farmers can actually have a more enriched soil so that when they actually do grow their crop, that they actually can produce more per acre of yield, which raises the income of farmers when they want to harvest their crops. It also makes sense for keeping our soil able to absorb high amounts of water. We know with climate change, when our soils are healthier by the use of cover crops, it'll actually absorb more water. We've seen as much as some practices are showing that up to 8 inches of rain will go into highly healthy soil. And if we use those practices, we will reduce the amount of flooding and runoff that feed into the nutrient the nutrients that run into the Mississippi River and increase the Gulf zone, a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So the state of Iowa should encourage, educate farmers on that practice, and we need to make it easier for them to purchase cover crops. Maybe it's a subsidy to farmers that do the right thing, because it's beneficial not merely to the farmers improving their production, which brings more money to the farmer, but it also keeps our environment and our waterways clean.
Dr. McGuire, your question will be A. David, please read question A.
The way we reduce water pollution in this nation is to require industry and also ordinary citizens to pay to upgrade the plants that discharge waste to the rivers. Should we treat agriculture, the agricultural industry, differently? And please elaborate.
Well, thank you. It's a good question. And I know there's two public health people here, so the first thing we ought to talk about is this is so big because this is about the public's health. And as a doctor, it's very important that we think about this always as a health issue. And when we're not having good water, clean air, good soil, that is a public health issue. How would we address this? And how would we make sure that we're holding everyone accountable like we do some people? I think that starts with a lot of different ways of doing it. Number one, if you're talking about livestock, the master matrix that we all talk about should be just blown up. It does not work for anyone. Now, what I would suggest is that we take that same idea, the framework, and we have a statewide framework so that one county can't impact another county. So we have statewide minimums or statewide framework of what we need to do about to have clean water for our agriculture, and then take local control, because right now we have such a lack of local control. If locally people do not want to have certain things in their local area, then I think that's how they should be able to decide. And if other areas for economic development purposes would like to have that and want to figure out a way to make sure their water is clean because we can't impact another county because of that state matrix, I think those are the kind of frameworks we would need to put in place. The other thing I think we need to do is right now we have a voluntary nutrient reduction strategy. When's the last time you did anything voluntarily that costs you money? Now, I don't think that we should balance the budget on the back of farmers. I think this should be something we do all together. And honestly, these three questions really go hand in hand because it is about sustainable farming like cover crops. It is about things like that that help us and help farmers. But we have to make sure we're doing that together. And some of that is about raising some of the prices for our commodities so that farmers feel like they have the ability to put in cover crops and to take what they might think is a risk that first year. So I think it's a very complicated subject, but I think it's something with leadership in the governor's office we can do.
Now, Mr. Niederrock, you will also have question A. David, can you please reread the question?
Okay. The way we reduce water pollution in this nation is we require industry and ordinary citizens to pay to upgrade sewage treatment plants that discharge waste into rivers. Should we treat agriculture differently from that? And please elaborate.
The short answer is no. We should treat it the same. Basic economics. If you raise the cost of doing something, people do less of it, do it less frequently. So no, we need to factor in the society cost of pollution into things that farmers consider when they're making choices. I think Mr. Norris made some really good points. So we have had a long history of pushing farmers to do what they do now. So we have to do it gradually. We can't do it all at once because they did not really choose the situation we have now. They've been incentivized and encouraged to get into that. I think we need some very creative financing to help farmers do pollution control measures. I'm in favor of having a state bank of Iowa, a publicly owned bank, that lends money to farmers at very low interest rates. North Dakota uses that to very good effect to do that, and has some real good results with it. Farmers are showing more and more interest in doing conservation type of things. It's actually we forget that there was a time when no-till farming was a radical idea. Now it's mainstream. Cover crops and all kinds of barriers around waterways, all kinds of things can become mainstream very quickly once the economic case for them is made clear to farmers. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the future on that. We just need strong leadership from government in order to make sure the more economic approach, the long-term economic approach, is publicized well. Precision farming also has a lot of potential there, and that's something that, believe it or not, the Farm Bureau is very interested in, trying to make sure we don't put nutrients on places where they don't do any good. So there's a lot of hope for the future. We need a strong government approach, though.
Thank you. And now we're going to move on to civil rights questions. And we're going to start off with Ms. Glasson. Ms. Glasson, your question will be C, and Jason will be reading the question. Please read the question.
All right. So one of LULAC's top legislative priorities last year was to prevent the passage of voter ID laws in Iowa, which we view as a form of voter suppression. As governor, what measures can you take to protect voting rights in general and specifically to restore the voting rights of felons?
First of all, I changed the Secretary of State so it's not Paul Pate. And vote for that candidate. And you're right, it is voter suppression, just like so many other states have tried to do, and it's one of the Koch brothers' agenda across the country to minimize the votes for Democratic voters. We absolutely have to reverse this devastating voter ID law that impacts so many folks in our state. And it's clearly intended to minimize folks, people of color, minorities, the poor, folks that just don't have the opportunity to have an ID. We absolutely need to remove the obstacles at the polling place. We need same-day registration, automatic voter registration for folks in the state. We should not have to produce an ID to be able to vote in our state. The fact that it's a myth that fraud in voting in Iowa or in this country is a major issue. This is a purely partisan issue, and just really does restrict the ability for folks to exercise their democratic right to vote in our society. So as governor, I will support candidates that are running for Secretary of State that believe like I do. Everyone deserves the ability to vote in our election process, make it easier to vote in elections, and make sure that we remove any obstacles that folks face at the ballot when they go into their polling places.
Dr. McGuire, and you will be asked the same question. Jason, please reread the question.
One of LULAC's top legislative priorities last year was to prevent the passage of voter ID laws in Iowa, which we view as a form of voter suppression. As governor, what measures can you take to protect voting rights in general and specifically to restore the voting rights?
Good job. I second the Paul Pate idea, that's for sure. You know, we need the kind of leadership in Iowa that is every person in this room, every person who's eligible should be able to vote, and that includes felons. And so we should be working on that right away. That's the biggest part of this. And how can you work on it? Well, right now we're going the wrong direction. The Republicans have put in last year, in the many things that they did that were awful, the voter suppression, basically, law. I'm sure it had a different name, but that's what it was. And what we need to do is repeal that, because all it's going to do is keep people from voting. You've noticed some people get these voter ID cards in the mail. They have no idea what they're for. And this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen where one of us is going to be your next governor. And we need to have everybody voting to make sure that's the right person. What I would do is even go farther than repealing that law. I think we should go all the way to vote by mail. I don't see why we wouldn't want everyone to vote. That's what Oregon does. It's actually cheaper, and it gets more people involved. Why would we not go to that? Why would we not have every person vote? I think that's the kind of, rights we should have as a governor. And as your governor, I would make sure that everybody voting, and you should go to the caucuses, but everybody voting is so important in every election. The other thing I would say to all of you, bring a friend. You know what our voting turnout's like. It's not what it should be. So I'm going to admonish all of you, get 5 friends, take them to the polls. I don't know why people don't vote. I vote, my kids vote, everyone I know that I can tell votes, but we've got to also handle that our population doesn't vote, and certain communities don't vote. If we want change, folks, we all have to vote. And as your governor, I will make sure we'll try to make it, repeal this law to make it easier, but also try to get to mail-in voting so we can make it even easier for everyone to be a part of the democratic process.
Germany, they told me Bach.
Your question will be B. Jason, can you please read question B?
So Illinois recently passed a law entitled the Trust Act, which among other things prohibits local law enforcement from engaging in immigration enforcement as a federal function. Iowa, on the other hand, seems to be going the other way. In particular, SF 481, which is about to pass or get through. If elected governor of Iowa, would you support and work for a similar law to the one in Illinois, not the one that the Republicans are pushing?
Absolutely, yes. We can't afford to have local law enforcement working to enforce immigration laws. They have their hands full doing other things, and it makes their job much harder. All kinds of law enforcement people testified, just I think yesterday, in fact, on that topic, either today or yesterday, on that topic, saying that we don't want to have what's being proposed by the Republicans. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. We need to make Iowa the most welcoming state in the entire country. Why? Because we're a graying state. Clearly because it's the right thing to do, but also because we're a graying state. If you look at where we're going to be in 25 or 50 years in terms of demographics, this is an economic necessity, an economic development necessity that we have to appeal to all kinds of folks, not only from around the country, but around the world, to come to Iowa. Otherwise, we're not going to have the workforce, unless there's a huge spike in the birth rate, which isn't expected. We are not going to have the workforce we need to economically thrive. Plus, again, it is the right thing to do. I was very proud of my little town of 5,000 people just outside Des Moines passed a welcoming cities resolution when Des Moines wasn't so willing to do that. But we need to also speak out, as I alluded to before, clearly and loudly. Forget about the Iowa Nights. Every time there are racist and xenophobic and bigoted comments, we have to directly confront them, because otherwise people just acquiesce. People think that's the new normal.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to go on to Mr. Martinez, again speaking for Nate Bolton. Your question will be A. Jason, can you please read the question?
Sure. Racism is one of the main threats, if not the main threat, to civil rights in the state of Iowa, in particular for people of color, but all people in Iowa suffer. Both parties have participated in subtle and explicit forms of racism in Iowa. In 2002, the then Democratic Governor Vilsack signed a bill making Iowa an English-only state, or English as the official language. Contrary to the governor's words at this time, this law has not been a unifying policy. Concurrently, we also have a rise in hateful language and hate speech in our political discourse, and which has trickled down to our community members and in our high schools. Are you willing to support the repealing the law that made Iowa an English-only state? And if so, how would you approach this concept with your party and with Republicans?
I do not have specific notes on how Senator Bolton would address this specific issue of Iowa being an English-only state. What I will say is that in September, when DACA was repealed, we had a rally in Iowa City, my organization, Hawkeyes for Dream Iowa, that over 700 people attended. A lot of people said that when we were starting to get that rally on the ground, starting to get things organized, that it was going to be really difficult to organize the issues of the Latinx community here in Iowa in a way that brings to the forefront in a state where we're only 6 to 8% of the population. But I would say that one of the first calls I got was from Senator Bolton, who called and asked how he could help. Not if he could speak, but how he could help. And at the end of the day, he stood there in the back with the 700 other people that attended this rally and heard the stories of University of Iowa students who were enrolled in DACA and fearful of what its repeal would mean. We read letters at this rally. We heard stories from people who had 4.0s, they were working 3 jobs, they were doing everything they were supposed to do, but at the end of the day, they couldn't, because of a political label, which is what so much of the rhetoric that we're hearing is really kind of centered around. The political labels of DACA, the political labels of immigrants, the political rhetoric, the hateful speech, it's all centered in these hateful rhetorical points. And I believe that Senator Bolton stands with so many of these issues and stands for sanctuary cities. He voted against the ban on sanctuary cities last year. He believes that local law enforcement should not be using taxpayer resources to be an immigration task force. He believes that Dreamers are the solution to so many issues that our state faces in our education employment shortages and our healthcare employment shortages. We need to see, I believe that Senator Bolton sees immigrants as the means to so many of the solutions that we're searching for. And so I believe that in that, hopefully I was able to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Wilburn, your question will be question B. Jason, please read question B.
So again, this is Illinois recently passed a law entitled the Trust Act, which among other things prohibits local law enforcement from engaging in immigration enforcement, which is a federal function. Again, Iowa's not going that direction, they're going the other direction. If elected governor of Iowa, would you support and work for a similar law to the one in Illinois?
Absolutely. Maybe it starts with pointing out just the simple fact that there's a Republican in the state of Illinois. But as you pointed out, that both parties have supported some of this legislation. Part of reaching across the aisle will be making some of those arguments that just to kind of juxtapose what challenge people on their thinking. And if in terms of that piece, I would work with the Attorney General's office in terms of trying to make legal arguments at the national level. But another piece about reaching across the aisle to try and generate that support is working with all of you to tap into that energy, the support for DACA, to support for citizenship, to use that to vote, but to also have forums like this where we are asking and holding elected officials accountable to let them know that this is something that we don't want having happen. I think another piece of that is that directive through law enforcement. Once we are able to get it in place, that we will not engage in that type of activity. When I was mayor of Iowa City, one of the things we did was monitor law enforcement on their traffic stops. And I think that's a piece that could be easily adapted. We participated in a study, and just the fact that they are being watched in the type of stops, if they're making pretextual stops, which is another area and aspect of this that a directive can be given. But it's got to start with us putting people into office that are willing to stop these type of practices.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Norris, your question will be A. Jason, could you please reread question A?
Sure. So again, racism, major threat to civil rights in Iowa and the United States. Both parties participate in subtle and explicit forms of racism. As an example, Democratic Governor Bill Sachs signed the English-only law for Iowa in 2002. Contrary to the governor's words at that time, this law has not been a unifying They're related is also the rise of hate speech against Latinos and other people of color in Iowa, which trickles down to our community members and to our youth. Are you willing to support repealing the law that made Iowa an English-only state? And if so, how would you approach this concept and the concept of racism with your party and with Republicans?
Thank you. I should start this out by saying I was the state Democratic Party chair when we elected Tom Vilsack governor in 1998, and we'd take him again today if we could have him. And I think you're fair to criticize him here. I was no longer his chief of staff when he signed that, but on numerous occasions I've had conversations with him, and he knows it was a mistake. If he were here tonight, he would tell you that. People make mistakes, we should accept that. And we should move on, and we should repeal this. There's no place in Iowa for barriers for justice, be they symbolic or real. That's why when I announced my candidacy for governor, after I left my family's farm, I started my trip around the state in Storm Lake, Iowa. Because I wanted to shed a light on the importance of Iowa being a welcoming state. Whether you're a fifth-generation Iowa like me, or you arrived here yesterday, you are a part of our future, and we should embrace your opportunity as much as our opportunity to have you here and be successful. And Storm Lake is a prime example of that. I wanted to point out it was Governor Ray, a Republican governor who invited the Southeast Asian refugees to Iowa after the Vietnam War, and we welcomed them with open hearts. That's how I will talk to both Democrats and Republicans about this issue. It's who we are. It's our love and sense of community and caring for each other is who we are as Iowans. We've got to recognize, as Jonathan said, new Iowans are a part of our future if we want to grow. The new, younger generation respects diversity more than some of our old codgers out there. That's our future. It's who we are and what we need to be, and I wanted to set that example from day one in my campaign, that we're going to be a state that embraces all people.
Now we're on to our final section, which is on fiscal responsibility. We're going to start with candidate Niederball. Does it say it better? I don't know. Let's try here. Your question will be B. Ms. Newton-Butt, please read question B.
Good evening. Your question is, Iowans can deduct the amount that they pay in federal taxes from their state taxes. Iowans will be receiving a tax break on our federal taxes, which likely means that our state tax bill will be higher. Do you see a need to reform Iowa's income tax law, and if so, what would you change?
That's a complicated question. Federal deductibility, I'll deal with. It depends so much on what's around it. I mean, federal deductibility is almost impossible to answer in a vacuum. It's been discussed, as I was a staff person for the legislature, I heard it discussed in such painful detail and with such passion. It really depends on what you do to tax rates and what you do to the overall tax system. So I can't take a position on for or against deductibility unless we see what happens. We need to fix our tax system. Right now, upper income people and big business have too many deductions, exemptions, and credits. Nationally, higher income folks pay a lower percentage of their total income in taxes than most of us, low and middle income people. That's wrong. We have a regressive tax system. We need to change our tax system, but you can't just do income tax in a vacuum. You need to change. We need to look at it in a holistic way of property tax, which needs to be reduced for a lot of people and raised back up for commercial folks. We need to look at our sales tax, which, although I like, I kind of seen the light on funding the environmental issue with that, the portion of a cent. We need to lower our sales tax overall because it's a regressive tax. We need to look at taxes overall. So yes, I think we need to totally reform our tax system, not just in the context of federal tax reform, but to make it much more progressive and to raise a great deal more money by repealing credits, exemptions, deductions that benefit special interests and wealthy folks.
Thank you. Mr. Norris, your question will also be B. Jasmine, could you please reread the question?
Iowans can deduct the amount that they pay in federal taxes from their state taxes. Iowans will be receiving a tax break on our federal taxes, which likely means that our state tax bill will be higher. Do you see a need to reform Iowa's income tax law? And if so, what would you change?
Thanks for straightening that out for me too, Jonathan. It is complicated. Here's the deal. I'm for, it does create a misperception about Iowa's tax liabilities that is somewhat discouraging for some folks who may want to be investing or doing business in Iowa. To the extent we can change that, we should. But the overarching principle should be whatever tax law changes we make in this state, we make them more progressive and not regressive. So if we can change this and it results in a status quo, but preferably a more progressive tax system in the state of Iowa, and at the same time reduces that kind of artificial barrier that creates the perception out there we have higher tax rates than we actually do, I think that's a positive. But the overall principle of our tax system should be to make sure that those who have gotten so much of tax breaks and tax credits and deductions over the past 5 years in this state, the Republicans have passed, that put us in a position to not be able to fund public education, to not be able to fund mental health services, and reverse this ridiculous privatization of Medicaid that is hurting our most vulnerable citizens and making it more and more difficult for rural hospitals to stay in business and provide services across this state. We just had such fiscal mismanagement. And it starts with our budget reflecting our priorities, and our taxes should reflect our priorities too, which is to address the overarching problem, and I think in Iowa, is that we have such a division between have and have-nots. We have got to lift wages and lift income opportunity for so many Iowans. When 31% of our households can't make their economic needs, 70% of single-parent households can't meet their economic demands for just basic living expenses. When half of our children born eligible for Medicaid and free and reduced loan has doubled in the last 15 years, we have got an income problem in this state that we have to address. Our tax system should reflect helping those folks who need to get more opportunity to support themselves and their family in this state.
Thank you. And now we move on to Mr. Wilburn. Your question is also B. Jasmine, could you please reread the question?
Absolutely. Iowans can deduct the amount that they pay in federal taxes from their state taxes. Iowans will be receiving a tax break on our federal taxes, which likely means that our state tax bill will be higher. Do you see the need to reform Iowa's income tax law? And if so, what would you change?
The answer is yes. And as part of just an overall evaluation of the system, we need to look at ways that there can be a more progressive and more fair tax system. Within that, it is contextual depending on what happens, going at the federal level. But looking at rather than an outright, yes, you can deduct your federal, federal taxes, your federal return, is to take a look at even within that a progressive system. Maybe it's not all Iowans. Maybe there's again based on income and other forms of wealth that we take a look that you are that those folks are contributing. But even broader, we do need to take a look at rolling back some of the corporate tax breaks. When I was on council and mayor, one of the first questions that a business would ask if they were looking to relocate was, well, what can we get? But beyond, and not that we have to give them anything, but beyond that, the second question they would ask is, what are the schools like? What is there here for people to do with arts and culture? So rolling back part of the corporate tax breaks for anyone who is in business here, there is a benefit for you because you've got strong workers. You got a strong workforce. You've got people that will help deliver your your product, help build your product if we are treating the workers fair. So there's a piece into it for you two in the corporate world that you get out of paying those corporate taxes.
Thank you. Now, Dr. McGuire, your question is not B, it'll be C. Jasmine, please read question C.
Iowa has laws and policies that are intended to lure business and thus more jobs into Iowa. What is your position with respect to TIF, tax increment financing, and tax incentives offered by Iowa Economic Development Agency? And do you have a different approach?
Well, first, we should want to bring businesses to Iowa. And they want to come here. And I think, was it Ross who just said, they come here because we have a great workforce, and we have good education, we have good health care. That is what they come here for. But we also have some incentives based on what other states might give them. I don't want to get in a bidding war, but what we've done of late, in the last 7 years under the Republican and GOP, is we have really made just bad deals. You should never give away incentives and not get something in return for Iowa taxpayers who are paying that and for Iowa workers, and yet we're not. Sometimes we don't even raise the wages of a community when we do one of these. That's certainly the first thing you want to do, is you want to raise the wages. They should be good paying jobs with good benefits. We shouldn't sell ourselves so short, and we do all the time. So I don't like incentives for when they're not used for a proper, making sure Iowa workers get what they need. But I do think that you need to have them. The other thing I think you need to do is think about how we're doling them out. Right now, we have a lot of incentives that go to larger communities, and that's not right. Everybody in Iowa will pay, every taxpayer in Iowa pays for these incentives. Every taxpayer in Iowa ought to get the value out of them. They should be geographic. We should make sure that each region is getting what they need, and they also should be not just large places, but small towns and middle-sized towns. And lastly, we have to make sure that these are worker-friendly. We should have labor agreements so that we can make sure that these are having good benefits and they're bringing back to Iowa the kind of jobs that we want in Iowa. That's not what we've been doing. It's not at all what we've been doing. And we need a governor who understands how to get those jobs here that are good-paying jobs and will actually pay back to the Iowa taxpayer.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Glasson, your question will be A. Jasmine, would you please read question A?
Absolutely. Governor Branstad and the Iowa GOP privatized the management of health services, Medicaid, stating that it would be more efficient and would result in great savings. These savings have not been realized, and there are less health services. As governor, what can you do? What will you do to fix this health services problem?
As a registered nurse for over 20 years, we all know in this room that the privatization of Medicaid in the state of Iowa is a total disaster. It's a total disaster for the patients, and it's a total disaster for the providers. As governor, Governor Branstad privatized Medicaid on his own. As governor, I will reverse the privatization of Medicaid and restore it back to the state because it was well managed, efficient, and cost effective and provided services to those most in need of the services that Medicaid provides. I also think that that's a good first start, is to reverse the damages that this administration and the former administration have done, but we need to do more. And I, as a candidate running for governor, am running on a bold progressive agenda that means that we need to pass universal single-payer health care so that no one is left behind in the state of Iowa, that we can address the problems that face our state and our nation if we stand up and cover every Iowan and every American.
Finally, Mr. Martinez, your question will be C. Jasmine, please reread question C.
Iowa has laws and policies that are intended to lure businesses and thus more jobs into Iowa. What is your position with respect to TIF, tax increment financing, and the tax incentives offered by Iowa Economic Development Agency? And do you have a different approach?
On behalf of Senator Bolton, he's absolutely against the $600 million in tax credits and exemptions giveaways that Iowa hands out to some of the largest corporations in the world with no guarantee of return on investment. For example, the state gave Apple $20 million to build a facility in Waukee for 50 unspecific jobs after construction. Instead of using money to fund large corporate entities to come to our state after we go through a bidding war process with other states, what we really need to focus on is investing that money into something along the lines of the 26-6 Main Street grants, which revitalize our small towns and mid-sized communities. Governor Reynolds looks to see tax cuts and tax credits this year, but we needed action on this last year. So what we actually can do to address the problem is, instead of kicking the can down the road, so Iowa will be in danger of yet another mid-year budget crisis. We need to ensure that we're working hard to ensure to end the giveaways and end the premise that we can only bring jobs to this state by doling out large corporate coupons. I was a field organizer in 2016, and the number one thing I talked to people about was oftentimes their kids and how they wanted their kids to have opportunities in the state, but they never could seem to have the kinds of jobs that this state or that people my age were looking for, people who were in their 20s. And what people my age want are jobs that are close to home, but jobs that bring the future to Iowa. And I believe strongly that what the Reynolds administration has done with their corporate handouts are not moving us in a direction that keeps Iowa's kids in Iowa. And what I would say is that right now, the sun is out, it is not raining, but Reynolds is raiding the rainy day funds. Thank you.
So that's the end of our questions. Thank you, candidates, for answering. We're going to have closing remarks now, and we're going to give you all 2 minutes again, and we're going to start with Mr. Wilburn.
Ready? Once again, thank you all for coming here this evening, and I wanted to add an additional thought I had about the Trust Act. There is one area where I would show some cooperation with state resources with the federal government. That's with human trafficking. I think that's a tragedy. It's here in Iowa, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And so I would dedicate state resources and give direction to do that. But you know, I can't help but again think back to times where I did do some work here in West Liberty as a youth worker, but also my time in Iowa City and Johnson County as mayor. And one of the things that I really learned from that time, one, just learning how to be an elected official, serving the people and working with my neighbors, but just that experience in working together with neighbors, whether that was my time as director of the Crisis Center, working with teachers and working with the Education Association in Iowa City to try and help create an environment that was conducive to teaching and learning. And very proud of all of the things that I learned from the Education Association about the critical importance of labor in our state. Awesome questions here this evening, and things that do cut across all people in all cultures. We all benefit when communities of color, people in the LGBT community are thriving, and that's part of what we need to have here, a welcoming, inclusive Iowa. And President 45 has tapped into the ugly side of human nature, and we can change that story that he tells us, but it's going to take hope. It's going to take that dedication and community. We can change that story, but we've got to speak up, we've got to show love, and choose a better path than hate. It's not just the importance of diversity and inclusion, but it's about creating a sense of belonging and welcoming for all of us. I'm Ross Wilburn. I'm running for governor. Let's be Iowa together.
Now, Mr. Norris, with your closing remarks. Mr. Norris.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I don't know why I assumed, but we're gonna go down the line.
Last minute rule change on
Don't worry. Start it that way.
Thank you, happy to go now. Let me treat this first part as a cleanup round. There's so many issues that we want to talk about, need to talk about. I didn't get to answer a couple of them. First of all, on the CAFO question, I support a moratorium on CAFOs and local control until we get a master matrix that works and gets our environment under control. We've got to get away from our chief economic development strategy in the state being tax handouts to lure people here. When our existing businesses are paying taxes and need workforce, and we should be using our resources to reinvest in our people and developing a workforce and creating better opportunity. Go to my website, norrisforthepeople.com. We recently released a policy paper on getting rid of the child care cliff, so people don't lose all of their child care benefits when they reach $11.17 an hour. They should be able to continue those child care benefits on a downward scale, so there's an incentive for working people to stay in the workforce. There's an increasing need for elderly services in this state, and too many caregivers caring for either spouses or elderly parents and taking them out of the workforce when they need to be in the workforce, and we need to make sure that our senior citizens in this state are taken care of and honored. And the cuts that this governor is making to our older Iowan programs are really not who we are. Let me close thanking first the Rotary Club. Thank you for partnering with the LULAC and making this a success tonight, a great success. My wife is a Rotarian, so you can give me a hard time, and she will too, about not joining it, but I tell you, she loves the Rotary. Let me thank you to LULAC for your leadership on fighting for not just Latinos, but civil rights across this state. We are a state that embraces diversity and welcomes people, and we need leadership to reflect that. When I stood at the DACA vigil down at the Nolan Plaza in Des Moines last fall, I said, where's our governor? Why wouldn't our governor be down here at that vigil? So let me just close with a statement that gives me hope from Sioux Center, Iowa. This is from a guy named David Ecoff in an Arizona Republic article. He's a bicycle shop owner in Sioux Center. He said, when it comes to Latino immigrants, we've gone from we tolerate them to we can't do without them to we love them. This is in the heart of Steve King country and conservative Iowa. Let's hold on to that thought and that hope and that belief that we will recognize who we are and be a welcoming state and embrace everybody.
Mr. Niederbach, I also messed up. It was supposed to go in a random order, but we're going to keep going this way, okay? It's on you. Yeah, right?
Well, thank you to LULAC and Rotary Club for sponsoring this very invigorating conversation. So many topics that could be brought up, we didn't get a chance to talk about. We need to do something very significant about the terrible mental health problems, the lack of a quality system in our state. I'm proposing legalizing cannabis and raising $200 million and pouring that into mental health, among other things, to really address the opioid crisis, which is a bipartisan issue killing people all across Iowa. We need to make education #1 in the country. I came here for quality education Iowa offered, a private school, Grinnell, but education is what lured me into Iowa. We need to make sure that we lure many, many, many people into Iowa with the very best public schools, the very best community colleges, the very best universities, and the very best ongoing lifetime learning, all free. We can do these things. We have the money. We simply need to reallocate how we spend it. That brings me to my last point, which is kind of wonky. But one of the things that has driven me crazy for the entire time I've been involved in Iowa budgeting, state government budgeting and local budgeting, is that we appropriate money each year for programs, but tax breaks are forever. We never look at the cost of these tax breaks every year. What other things we are foregoing by, let's say, not having sales tax on lawyers? I'm an attorney. Not having sales tax on lawyers. What are we foregoing by having the various deductions and exemptions and credits? Once we do that, once we change the process, and this is something the governor can do by themselves, it's going to change the whole goalposts, move the goalposts of the conversation. And that's the kind of thing that I think we need to really focus on as we move Iowa forward. Thank you very much.
And now we have Dr. McGuire with your closing remarks.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. And I think next year, I believe, is LULAC's 60th anniversary. So maybe if we can get one of us to be governor, which we're going to, and we can instill some of these policies, we can get the national convention right here in 60 years. That would be a way to tell them we're serious about this. You know, I'm sitting here, I don't know if any of you can see it, but it says, immigration's beautiful. All right, back on that poster. Well, I've been listening tonight, and immigration is beautiful. Think of the other things. Diversity is beautiful. Embracing different cultures is beautiful. No racial profiling is beautiful. Equal opportunity for all our citizens, that would be beautiful, wouldn't it? Affordable, accessible, quality health care, that's pretty beautiful. World-class education for every student in every zip code, that's beautiful. Good paying jobs with good benefits everywhere in Iowa, that would be beautiful. Clean air, clean water, good soil, that would certainly be beautiful. Fixing Medicaid for 600,000 Iowans who are struggling to get access to Medicaid and healthcare services, that would be beautiful. Having community mental health resources, that would be beautiful. Funding women's health, that would be beautiful. Exactly. Raising the minimum wage, that would be beautiful. Restoring collective bargaining rights, that would be beautiful. Knowing climate change is a scientific fact, that would be beautiful. Affordable childcare, affordable accessible housing, those would be beautiful. I think we can have a beautiful Iowa, and I think it involves all of us and many people who might not look like us, but they're part of our communities. They're a special part of our communities. So thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for all you're going to do by caucusing and voting. And thank you for considering McGuire for governor. I appreciate and try to earn your support.
Ms. Glassen, your final remarks.
Well, I too want to thank LULAC and the Rotary of West Liberty for hosting us all here tonight. And thank you all citizens for folks coming out tonight on a work night. But I want to cut right to the chase tonight because it's time to admit that the establishment politics of the Democratic Party have failed our Latino communities. Whether it's at the national level, where our U.S. Senate Democrats caved in when it came time to stand up for Dreamers, or right here in Iowa, where the levels of income inequality and the uninsured rates for Latino families are greatly higher than the state's average. The days of appealing to our Latino communities for their votes and repaying them with empty promises and platitudes must end now. A party message of we're better than the other side does nothing for Latino families. We need a governor who's willing to fight for real, bold, progressive change in 2018 and beyond. Because when Latino women make 60 cents for every dollar a white man makes, when 23% of our Latino communities live in poverty, it's time to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. When 15% of Latinos in Iowa go completely uninsured, it's time to invest in universal single-payer health care. And when only 12% of our Latino community go on to earn a bachelor's degree, it's time to make community college free and public college debt-free. And when our leaders fail to protect our immigrants, it's time we elect a governor who will stand up and say that ICE has no place in our communities and no place in our local law enforcement. My name is Kathy Glosson. Let's stand up together for bold progressive change in 2018. Thank you.
Finally, Mr. Martinez, on behalf of Mr. Bolton.
I'd really like to thank you guys for letting me step in for Senator Bolton. I was not expecting this kind of craziness when I was at my 8:30 lecture this morning. I'm going to read a letter from Senator Bolton that he told me to read in conclusion. Dear attendees, first, let me apologize for not being able to attend the Fordham. As a state senator, it is impossible for me to truly know what obligations will be given on any given day when we are in session, making it impossible for me to know if I can attend events out of the side of the Des Moines area. Thank you all for understanding and welcoming Emiliano, a fierce advocate for Dreamers in the greater Latino community who is representing me tonight. I grew up in Columbus Junction, a small town like West Liberty that has a thriving Main Street because of immigrant-owned small businesses. Iowa has a history of welcoming communities, with Governor Ray welcoming immigrants from our state from Southeast Asia, but many of us are disappointed to see how far Iowa has recently fallen away from that tradition. While national rhetoric is divisive and hurtful, some of the loudest coming from our own representatives in DC, Iowa has fallen from greatness within our own state leaders, passing voter ID laws and failing to support the growing Latino populations in our communities that make our state thrive. Republicans have failed our state, especially our minority communities. With misplaced priorities, we must fund our schools, ensuring everyone has an English language learner can thrive. We must reverse privatize Medicaid that has left so many Iowans behind with poor health care coverage. We must end the millions of dollars of corporate tax giveaways that our state hands out to the wealthiest companies. In a world with much investment and little return, on average, Iowa Latinos community earn 2/3 of what other Iowans are making. We must change that, supporting new opportunities as well as increasing wages. I worked as a workers' rights attorney for 12 years and defended immigrants who have been mistreated by bad-acting employees and discriminated against in the workplace. I've seen firsthand how migrants and immigrant workers work hard to earn a living for their family and are taken advantage of so often by bad-acting employees. And I work to achieve justice for those families. In the state Senate, I have fought against hurtful bills like voter ID bills and legislation that shorten the length of time to file discrimination and complaints. I've sponsored bills on equal pay, and I'm trying to address the growing problem of wage theft, and offered legislation to expand retirement savings opportunities and benefits packages for small businesses and part-time workers, raise minimum wage, expand workplace protections and union rights, and guarantee workers' choice in doctor when someone is hurt on the job. Our state is headed in the wrong direction under Republican leadership. We can turn it around. So I thank you for attending this forum and staying involved in our political process. This election is a fight for the soul of our state, and it's a fight we must win. Thanks, Senator Mayberry.
And that concludes, that got loud. And that concludes the end of our forum. I hope it has been extremely informative for everyone in this room. Thank you again to the candidates for running for the governor's office and for giving Democrats a choice in the primary elections, which will be held on June 5th, 2018. Again, just as they reiterated, make sure that you all go out, voice your opinions, get out and vote.